All right. Today we have the honor of sitting down with Ousseynou Nakoulima, who was recently appointed as a member of the Base Foundation board. Welcome. During his exceptional visit to Basel, we took the opportunity to hear his reflections on climate finance and his view on what are the key strategies to unlock climate finance and development finance in the future. You've worked across leading institutions like the African Development Bank, Green Climate Fund. What personal motivations have guided you in your journey in climate finance?
So, thank you for the question, Arnav. I believe it's mostly learning. I think learning and curiosity has driven me throughout most of my career. And equally, I would say contributing to what I would call the public goods, being useful. And I think this is maybe kind of legacy from my family. My grandmother used to always tell us the measure of the value of a person is really how useful they are for their community. And I think that's really stuck with me, my siblings. So whatever I do in life, I always try to see, okay, with this metric, how much I'm contributing to the common good. And I think given the climate crisis, from the professional point of view, contributing to reducing this climate crisis is one way to contribute to the climate good. And learning, again, I think it's a fascinating space where everything is new. There's so much actually to innovate that you learn every day. So learning and being useful for the community, I would say, have been my personal motivations.
Mm-hmm. What personal mark would you like to leave on the sector?
So I think one key aspect of this sector is the need for creativity, for innovation. So when I was at the African Development Bank, I was in charge of renewable energies in Africa. And it's a common, well-known fact, I would say, that 600 million people in Africa don't have access to energy. But at the same time, you have many developers in the renewable energy space who want to invest in Africa. But this demand is not meeting this supply. And it requires innovation, creativity to make them match. So innovation, creativity is part of the answer, I would say. The other, I think, key aspect is the fact that to find a solution for climate finance, you need to bring people around the table. Not one single party can solve the issue. For instance, if you want to develop a solution that brings energy that is expensive to a community which have low income, you need to have both the private sector player, the community, but also the government regulator. So being able to broker this type of dialogue is also something that is quite interesting and quite key and quite innovative.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Leading on from that, what are the most critical strategies, let's say, or incentives needed to unlock and scale private sector investment in climate-compatible development? And like you said, of course, innovative solutions within developing countries.
Yeah. So again, I feel that one of the key barriers, constraints for more private sector investment is, and I don't think we say it enough, is just the ability to pay from the users. Because the private sector has to make a profit in order to be sustainable. But to make a profit, they need also their audience, their key targets, to be able to pay for those services. So it's either lowering the cost of the services, but there's just so much you can lower it, or to find a way for people to afford. So there are a few solutions, but we cannot escape the fact that we need to find a way to fill that gap. So that's where, in order to unlock the private sector solutions, we need still the public, the government. That's what we call sometimes blended finance, to either lower the risk or to lower the cost so that the private sector can still make a profit and the public can have a service that is of quality. And that requires some quite creativity in terms of how to structure things. The other issue is the availability of capital, because I think one of the differences between developing countries and developed countries is the availability of capital, which is much lower in developing countries. So how can you still, for these investments that require upfront capital, make available equipment without having to mobilize all that capital? So you have heard, I guess, solutions like pay as you go, where people don't have to invest upfront the capital required to acquire an equipment, but they can pay it as they use the equipment as they go. So these type of solutions that don't require to mobilize too much capital upfront is also another way to unlock.
So you mentioned blended finance. Could you give us maybe some examples of best practice?
So one way for blended finance to be leveraged in order to unlock capital is to de-risk the project. What does it mean, de-risking a project? For instance, in Latin America, I remember when I was at the Green Climate Fund, we worked with a local, regional actually, development bank to finance bonds issued by local private sector. And these bonds were more attractive for private investors because the Green Climate Fund came to take part of the risk out. So bringing the funds that through a guarantee to lower the risk for those private investors who would buy the bonds. So that's one example. A second example, when I was at the African Development Bank, we provided financing in the Democratic Republic of Congo to establish mini grids outside of the large cities. So there, the issue was the affordability of the electricity provided. And one way to make this affordable was to take money that was cheaper from the Green Climate Fund and blend it with commercial lending from the African Development Bank, so that at the end, the tariff would be low enough for the users to be able to afford it. So these are two examples, one de-risking, another one lowering the final cost, where blending meaning mixing commercial lending with what we call concessional financing, which is with a lower cost, can have good outcomes.
Perfect. What role should climate finance play in turning vision into action?
I think climate finance is a concept that is quite fluid. And the way I would frame it is that it can bring together actors who are not traditional players in finance. When you talk about finance, you often think about banks, insurance companies, but when you talk about climate finance, you have to expand a little bit that scope to other type of institutions. So I work for the Green Climate Fund, which mobilizes funding from developed countries to support developing countries in their climate journey. So this type of institutions is also key in bringing around the table non-traditional actors. One important actor, for instance, is municipalities. At the city level, we have noted that sometimes climate action can happen even more easily than at the national level. So I feel that one way climate finance can change the way the approach of traditional finance is to think about inclusion of non-traditional actors. And maybe that's also one key learning I've had from my career. And that also answers some of your previous questions. I feel that governance can make a great difference in terms of unlocking private sector investment in this type of space. How? By having an inclusive governance. One of the issues and one of the challenges in climate finance is that the benefit, sometimes you don't see it straight away. The benefits are longer term. So how can you make sure that people are still incentivized people or companies are incentivized to play in that space is when you bring in the governance people who actually have this long-term view. And I feel that sometimes having young people in the governance is important because they often are quite sensitive to this longer-term view, and it helps actually think about not only the interests of certain parties, but the interests of all parties concerned.
You also mentioned governance as a key factor. Could you also maybe give us an example to highlight this point?
Yeah. So one of my main takeaways from my time, for instance, as a Green Climate Fund, was the need, whenever you design a project, to include multiple stakeholders. What do you mean by stakeholders? Mean people, organizations, institutions who have an interest in that project, either because they are beneficiary or because they will be contributing to it. So one of these constituencies is civil society organizations. So whatever project we would undertake, we would always make sure that at the design phase, we will connect with, for instance, youth organizations. And that really happened, I would say, systematically. I remember many of the projects I've done in Africa. I was making sure that I identify in the country what are the youth organizations that are the most reputable, that are the most active, most representative, and ask them what they think about the design of the project. Do we have any blind spot? Are we making sure that all parties have been heard, both in terms of their expectation, but also their concerns, their challenges, so that the project, once it's implemented, doesn't harm anybody, and the benefits are also distributed in an equitable way. So youth organizations, civil society organizations as a whole are really a key partner.
So of course, having all the stakeholders involved is very crucial. How do you manage that in practice? How do you get the civil society or others on board?
It's a great question. And I think that's where the creativity also is important. You know, it should not be a tick box exercise. And that's the danger. The danger is to say, okay, I'm going to engage with stakeholders. I'm going to organize workshops. People sign at the end of the workshop, done. No. I think we need to make sure that the voice of the relevant people, so which when I say relevant, it means that we need to think really very precisely about who should come around the table. So the voice of the relevant people are heard and also incorporated. And why I say creativity, there are multiple ways to do it beyond workshops. And now technology is actually a very good way to be more inclusive. With the mobile telephony, we are able to contact and connect through surveys with a larger audience and find a way to get insight from the data that comes from these surveys. So that's one example. I've seen in cases where people had to vote electronically with their mobile, so that it's not just a small focus group, it's a larger representation. But at the end of the day, I think what matters is to be honest and true about the intention, to be actually intentional in wanting to capture what people really need, what they really want, and what they really think. In that sense, also another maybe last takeaway is you should not think about a project like just from the technical point of view. It has to be also from the sociological point of view, thinking about the culture and see really what people care about locally and have this local sensitivity and local understanding. And for that, you need multiple type of skills in the project team, in particular a skill set that helps understand the local sensitivities, the local culture, and the local expectations.
Perfect. I couldn't agree more. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Ousseynou. That was very interesting and very unique insights. We wish you the best for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.